I have been cooking for almost 20 years, which makes me feel really old. But in these 20 years, I have used a ton of different kitchen scales, many of the highest rated kitchen scales. And I can easily say, without a shadow of a doubt, that I have found the best kitchen scale for 99% of people. So let's just go straight into it, and I will reveal that I think the best kitchen scale on the market for the majority of people is the OXO 11 pounds or 5 kilos stainless steel kitchen scale. Now, there are a number of things which make this amazing, but let's start with a lot of these standout features before I get into a lot of the basic stuff, which it's also excellent at. So my absolute favorite feature of the scale is that the screen pulls out, which, as many of you know, is not the most reliable form of birth control. Oh, that was terrible, that was so bad. Yes, the screen, it pulls out, which makes it really, really easy to measure things in large bowls, or even put like a whole pot on here, or if you're like a calorie counter, put your plates directly on this, without covering the display screen. Which, for the way that I like to cook, which is usually, let's say I'm making a loaf of bread, I'll get like my big mixing bowl and weigh things out directly on here. If I'm using something like smaller and cheaper that doesn't have that kind of technology, it becomes harder to read, it becomes more inaccurate to measure because it's sort of like off kilter a little bit. And this is just overall a much, much easier way to get a very accurate reading from your scale. Now, similar to that, whilst we're talking about the display, another one of my favorite features is that the display itself is backlit. And now you must be saying like, wow, that's really like, it's cool, but it's not that big a deal. Yes and no. So for starters, my vision isn't great, especially in low lighting, but also if you do have a big mixing bowl or like a tray or something like that, and it's sort of half covering the display, if it's not getting much light, it becomes very, very hard to read. And it's happened to me so many times where I've confused a 7 for a 1 or an 8 for a 0, which sounds a little pathetic, but can really throw off amounts inside of your recipes. So having a really easy to read glow-in-the-dark display makes it absolutely super. Whether you have a low-lit kitchen that you like to work in, or whether you're like me and just a little hard of seeing, this is a massive, amazing feature. And the last of these sort of like unique features that this display has is a little gauge on the side to tell you how close you're getting to the maximum weight capacity of the scale. The scale can weigh 5 kilos, which for the majority of kitchen tasks is super, but it's often happens to me where I'm measuring like close to 5 kilos or just above 5 kilos, and I weigh too much, and then it's really hard to like work backwards. With this scale, I can see exactly how much I'm adding before I've sort of gone over the limit. So if needs be, I can say like, okay, I'm just gonna weigh this in 2 batches and it's fine. That has definitely saved me some time and pain and effort. Okay, now let's talk about its more normal features. So, as far as a kitchen scale, this thing is super accurate. It is accurate to 1 gram, which is plenty for the majority of kitchen tasks. The only use case where I would say you need a different unit is if you're the type of person, who I kind of am sometimes, where if you're measuring something like bicarbonate of soda and you don't want it to be weighed in, let's say, a 1/4 teaspoon. You want a really accurate, like gram or milligram measurement. I would say get a microscale, which basically can measure things down to 0.1 of a gram instead of just down to 1 gram. Again, most people are not going to need that, but that is the only use case that I can think of where this is not accurate enough. If you're measuring yeast for bread, you're measuring coffee for your morning brew, this being accurate to 1 gram is more than enough. And then if you're talking about larger recipes and just trying to follow those, 1 gram is definitely more than enough. So yes, as I mentioned previously, the maximum weight capacity of this is 5 kilos. Having said that, it can also weigh in just grams, so 5,000 grams, although that's kind of an easy conversion to make. But it also does pounds and ounces, it does ounces by itself, if you use those measurements, which I think is more than fine. There are some scales which will measure things in milliliters, which is kind of a cop-out because it's usually exactly the same as grams. If you don't know, 1,000 grams of water is 1,000 milliliters of water. Those two are identical. 5 kilo weight capacity is more than enough for the majority of applications. Like, I've worked in big fancy restaurants where we had like 20 kilo scales and stuff like that. And this was still like the most used, most passed around scale in the kitchen because of how versatile it is and how easy it is to use. Other basic features. Other basic features which you would definitely find on other models. It has a tear or a 0 feature, which I know this isn't an instructional on how to use a scale, but I love that button because it allows me to measure multiple ingredients inside of the same vessel without having to do mathematics between each one. Like if I need a kilo of something, 500 grams of something, like I don't need to like add those up. I can just press tear after each one and get a really nice, clean, accurate measurement. Last but not least, really good build quality. It's really sturdy. I have never seen one of these break. This metal plate comes off and you can wash it separately, so you don't need to worry about like getting this really clean and damaging any of the electronics. Having said that, it's really quite splash resistant. Like I've spilled a bunch of stuff on these things. I've never seen one break. I've never submerged one entirely in liquid before, but like, I wouldn't recommend that. But it is quite splash resistant, very easy to wash, really great build quality, very nice and sturdy. I've never feel it go sort of like off center. And very importantly, to get good accurate measurements, it has nice rubber feet, so that even if you want to move it around, like it's not gonna move around once you're trying to measure something, which makes for a more accurate reading. Last but not least, and I know this is a big important factor for a lot of you out there, price. This thing is not the cheapest. It is $50, which I don't think is super unreasonable either for what you get out of it. I have gotten many scales in the past that I just needed on short notice because the previous one broke or whatever. This was cheap. It was like 15 euros, but a couple years later, screen's starting to go, the measurements aren't as accurate, it is much harder to clean, so there's like crusty bits in and around it. Yeah, and it has way less features. So this may last you way, way longer. You get way, way more usage out of it. And cheaper models can be kind of false economy. If you are on a budget, however, I do have some recommendations. There is a similar unit by a brand called Escali. It doesn't have the same features as this. The screen does not pull out, it's not backlit, but it is accurate up to 5 kilos, and it's like half the price of this. It's also smaller. Having said that, this is reasonably small. You can easily fit it into a drawer or a backpack or something like that. So this is not the most cumbersome or the biggest, which is another big plus for the amount of features that it has. But the Escali unit is much smaller and it's like half the price. If you don't need to be measuring anything up to 5 kilos and you want something that's like slightly smaller, let's say you're measuring, I don't know, coffee in the morning or whatever. They make a unit, the OXO model, I think it's like a 2.5 kilo model that's like 2/3 of the size or half the size. It's in matte black. It's pretty cool. I think it's like $30. I'll link everything inside of the description. There will be affiliate links, which means I get a small kickback, so you help the channel, but it doesn't cost you anything extra. Also uninstall Honey if you have that. They're scammers, but that's a separate story. But yeah, a kitchen scale is definitely one of the most important pieces of equipment that you can have in your kitchen, especially if you care about like replicating recipes accurately and being like consistent in your results. Super, super useful. I hope you found this useful. I hope you learned something. If you want more reviews like this, let me know what pieces of equipment or categories of equipment you would like me to review and recommend. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Go watch this video if you want some more equipment reviews. This is a video on like a speed peeler. They're like super cheap. One of the most useful things that you can have in your kitchen, and I would highly recommend that. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.